So in preparation for the oil sketch that I'm going to make of the library theme, I've been drawing from the recording of Hope modelling in the studio. Not a brilliant recording, because this one, for example, you couldn't see her head. But I've taken 4 different poses. I've actually cut them out because I want to move them around a little bit. I'm going to make it quite a busy library. I think libraries need our support. So let's have a busy library. I've drawn these figures on a similar scale, but when I come to put them in the painting, I'm going to make sure that these figures are smaller and are behind these larger foreground figures. But this is me just rearranging them just to see what I like the look of. And I'm going to have a large student studying figure here, maybe a little bit of a gap with the approaching figure with the books, and a librarian or somebody putting books back in the shelves. And I also want to work with my image from the Fine Art Library, so that figure putting books back in the shelves will be based on this this stack. So I've just taped them all together, and I think this will be that long, low bookshelf that's a feature of the Fine Art Library, and behind that then with some rather nice windows. So I'm not going to have I'm going to have a little bit of the interior of the library based on my pastel drawing that I did there. That's maybe all I want to do to this. The bookshelves go on all the way across this crowded library. I'm going to have to make sure that there's enough room for these people. And when I did this drawing, again, I quite liked the book in the foreground. So anyway, we'll see. We'll see how that develops. I've got to make changes to the scale of these figures, but I'm going to do that on the painting. So I've tinted my canvas. I've got my sketch to refer to, and I'm going to begin with this is a small bit of canvas, so a fairly large brush. Just going to play around a little bit with getting these figures to work in a convincing way. I thought I would have a bigger studying figure there. So you can see I'm just putting down some silhouettes. This stage is really me trying out the combination of these figures, trying to get them to be convincing, and doing it with an approach that's easy to change. There are these considerations. That figure is standing. All these are seated, so I've got their heads on the same level. This standing figure may go the way of the YouTube recording and have the top of her head cropped. But I'm thinking something like that. And actually, I didn't quite intend these lines not to be very horizontal, but I think that would be quite good if these bookcases weren't just, maybe the top's horizontal, but the base is coming up a little bit. So we've got a certain distance. I'm worried that the librarian, who already looks quite cross, is going to have no room to work. Maybe if she's further forward, she should be a little bit smaller. So that's plotting it out, as I say, in such a way that's fairly easy to change. Just working with the big brush and the rag, not getting too caught up in anything specific, because if I did that, then I wouldn't want to change these figures. So I think that's my kind of arrangement. That's bookshelves, and then we've got the windows maybe up here. I'm a bit unclear about what happens down there. She's got a table. It's a kind of small table for what's there. So that's my rough idea, which I'm now going to try as in a way I've done in charcoal. I'm going to do a few lines. I'll get a thin brush and do a few lines and just check, is that feasible? So I'm using now a fairly small brush because I want to draw a few hopefully useful lines to check out those initial shapes. Do they translate into something that will make sense between the figures? I've got individual figures, but now I'm trying to create a convincing composition. So I'm adding a few lines to really check out my first thoughts. So I'll do that to each of the figures and see what that generates. So I've done that to a couple more figures, and what's beginning to emerge as something of an issue, as I might have expected, is enough room. If I've got one table, then another table, I think I've just got to make this figure even smaller. And what's quite nice about the way I started is because it's just a sort of soft smudge shape, it does help if that figure stays fairly soft, not too strongly defined. I've also got some things to decide about here, what's happening on the floor. It's going to probably end up being quite dark, but I don't want these tables to look like they're taking up too much space. So that seems reasonable to me. Obviously, as I go on adding or trying to define different parts of my subject, I'm probably going to sort of identify things that don't quite add up. But I think if at this stage, in its monochrome state, it looks reasonably good, that suggests to me that the changes that will be required as I develop this aren't too extreme. This is almost a little bit like a painting with my eyes half closed. I know there's something about the floor I've got to resolve, but otherwise they look like they could live together. So I'm going to now start blocking in some of the big areas, really based on my pastel drawing of the library, with a certain green on the walls and brown bookcases. So I'm keeping the colour fairly subdued to start, and I'm blocking it in with that largish brush. Got to decide what's a window and what's a wall. So I've subdued these colours. I've maybe added a little bit of black, or I've added the brown, which was my drawing out colour, just so that there's not too much contrast between the colours at this stage. I've got a lighter colour for the window, but again, I didn't make it too strong. And the big brush just means, again, no detail. I've just got to plot out something of how the colours are going to develop in this composition. I'm still not sure about the floor, and I thought the bookshelves, I would just keep them a little bit neutral, so that I can add local colour if necessary, or at the next stage. As I've said, the floor is the bit that I'm least sure about, so I'm just going to kind of darken that for the time being, so that I don't have to, so it's not a distraction. I'm now going to introduce colour to some of the figures and leave the floor as something to decide on later. One more main colour I thought worth doing at this stage is the tabletop. I think a feature of the Fine Art Library are these lovely big wooden tables. I don't know about table legs yet, and maybe a little bit for the librarian's desk. So I'm going to start with the figure at the front, who I think is going to be, one of the main attention grabbing parts of my painting. I've gone on to a smaller but oil painting brush. Gone on to it's a #1 hog hair brush, and I'm giving her a blue top, and I've mixed 2 blues, a darker one which I've put on first, and then a lighter one. Again, it's all fairly subdued at the moment because I want to be able to change things if as these figures evolve, and this is a kind of vague bit of underdrawing, and I'm discovering things. What's that? Is that an arm, or is it a bit of book? So I need to be able to change things as the image emerges. I don't want to go too far with this foreground figure at this stage, but I do want to clarify a few things. So I've got some hair color, got some dark brown, and I've made a couple of colors for face and hands. As I did before, two tones, 2 values. She's looking down, and that's probably something I can't do much about at the moment, just for this stage, but I do want to just sort out where her position, and just a little bit of light. Certainly that hand is very light, leaning on her head, maybe a bit on her forehead. So I don't want to, as I say, go too far with this figure, but I'm kind of checking out my initial idea of how these figures can fit together. The last thing I'm doing to this foreground figure is just making these books stand out a little bit more, because I think that's part of explaining her. So I'm working on the standing figure, put in some color for the clothing. I also thought it was worth putting in something of the background bookcase, and now I'm just getting some color into head and hands. So I'm probably coming to the end of the time that I've got recording time. I've done things in this order because I wanted to bring out those figures, and I would do something to the background figures, but in the state that they're in, which is just suggested, that's working reasonably well. So that gives me a clue as to how far to go with bringing them out a little bit more, but not too much. And this is the point really of this oil study, this sketch, to decide what to emphasize, what to bring out. And there's things like the front of this table. Maybe I want to strengthen that, bring it in the foreground, develop the librarian, and so on. So we'll be in the studio, and let's do an oil sketch or a mixed media piece.